one of the things I'm thankful for, since this is the week before Thanksgiving when we're filming this, is that we have the internet. So candidates, especially national candidates, can no longer say in one community one thing and then go to another community and say something else. And even still, in the 21st century, we have candidates who forget they live in a YouTube world where we can play for each other the statements they made that are completely diametrically opposed or in some way prejudicial or small-minded or mean-spirited, that they think because they're in a safe area that they used to make these kinds of statements completely, guilt-free because they could just deny it.
Yeah. I think you're right. That's another area that many politicians have been slow to appreciate the implications of digital technology and the internet. This old style pulling the wool over the eyes of voters and only paying attention to them for a few months when you're up for re-election just doesn't really work very well anymore. And people do need to understand that they're in a continuous relationship with voters. And it's a two-way transaction. And voters have too much experience with other aspects of their lives in which they're frankly just getting much better service.
Exactly. All right, so we should do this show again in a year and talk about Jerry Brown's first year in office and sort of do a recap because it would be nice follow through. Next is the lieutenant governor. Gavin Newsom won, and he won by a fairly large majority, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was 10.5%, I think.
That's a fairly large,
and quite a surprise.
And what makes it a surprise?
Well, I think the polling was showing it to be a tight race, and I think a lot of people were surprised at the size of that win. And I think, as Robert Cruikshank would point out in many in many outcomes, the polling was shown up to be inaccurate by the only poll that matters, the one that happens on Election Day.
Well, there's two things that I think that are interesting for the Gavin Newsom story is that he had to overcome a couple of big hurdles. And one was a personal problem that he had and became very public, and the second one was his stance on gay marriage. He's actually, now we're discovering, was ahead of the curve. Mm-hmm. But that didn't sit well with a lot of conservative voters in California. And I'm gratified that did not become an issue. It's obvious it wasn't an issue by winning 10 points.
Yeah, although I think you always have to have the caveat of how much attention were voters paying to the lieutenant governor's race, because I think voters typically pay a lot of attention, if they're paying attention at all, to the top of the ticket and then diminishing attention rapidly as you go down. I am also happy that the gay marriage issue did not appear to hurt him. I'm not sure how much we can really read into that. I think there's probably a number of factors at play there. Certainly, gay marriage, I think, if you look at national and certainly California polling, the trends are so clear that most people don't want to interfere in other people's lives, and more people, as this is another effect of the spread of access to information, as being gay is no longer a deep, dark, shameful secret, but has been brought out into the open, and everybody realizes they have friends and relatives and loved ones who are gay and understand that these are fellow human beings, many of whom they love deeply. Clearly,
it brings up with at the end of the month, the Department of Defense, one of the most conservative, hide-bound institutions in the United States, is going to release their study on Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And already that's being leaked that 72% of people on active duty, not these old guys and gals that retired many, many years ago, 20 years, who were declaring that's going to affect unit morale and cohesion. That's garbage. The kids, the troops on the ground, the kids in the trenches, the ones fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq, don't give a damn.
No, they don't care. And again, that's a hopeful sign, and I'm glad to see that it didn't seem to make any material difference to Gavin Newsom's prospects. And I think that in California, playing to the conservative base just makes no sense. Perhaps in a primary, although I don't think it did Steve Poizner or Meg Whitman any good when they beat each other black and blue during their primary, trying to look more and more crazily conservative. But if you look at the voter registration and the trends in California, it doesn't make any sense to try to play to this hardcore conservative base. And I think, California leads the nation in tolerance and leads the nation in embracing the future. So I'm glad to see that the gay marriage advocacy of Gavin Newsom didn't seem to hurt his chances. I think also, frankly, Abel Maldonado's support among Republicans was probably a little bit weak because he had done what Republicans had seen as compromises on taxes to get budgets passed, and
right.
Some accused him of cutting a deal to be appointed lieutenant governor, which is the office he currently holds until Gavin Newsom takes office, as a reward for cutting that deal. So he may have lost some of his Republican base there. Some of it, frankly, is Gavin Newsom's a good-looking guy, and he's taller than Abel Maldonado.
It always
and
helps.
I hate to say it, but if you have two candidates and one of them's tall and good-looking, that candidate's got a natural advantage right there, especially, as I say, in a slightly down-ticket race where people are paying less attention.
How can you account, or can you account for this difference between polling that carried it as a close race to watch right up to the end?
Well, I think, as Robert pointed out, cell phones makes a big difference, that polling companies have difficulty dealing with people who only use cell phones. And increasingly, that describes young Americans who can't see why they would bother having a landline. And so, for legal reasons, it's difficult to conduct polls and reach people on their cell phones. So they have to build these models in which they statistically try to compensate for the fact that they can't reach as many people on cell phones.
Really?
So now you're dealing with all kinds of assumptions, and these assumptions are beyond my understanding of the polling process. I also think that there are different levels of quality in polling. There are some polling firms have been shown up in the past few years. Their methodology has been challenged. Sometimes they've been outright fabricating results.
Research 2000 has been alleged to have fabricated results.
And then there are other polling firms that have a good reputation, or analysts who survey collections of polls. Nate Silver, for example, who tend to have perhaps a better track record. But we get a lot of these polls, and people speak confidently making these prognostications, and then you just have to prepare yourself for the surprise on Election Day. And one other thing I would note is that even if the poll is accurate, it's only accurate for the moment in time when the poll was taken. Right. People's opinions change from one day to the next in response to the news, in response to the way questions were asked, all sorts of things.
Do you think, I just thought of this, do you think that Meg Whitman hiding from the media, our own California journalists, had an impact on...
I think she did a lot of things that didn't help. A lot of it comes down to how people judge your character. And I don't think that's necessarily a shallow way to decide. Our brains are pretty highly evolved for assessing people's characters. And in many ways, judging a book by its cover is not such a bad idea. People understand that when they're electing a leader, they can't really predict everything that leader is going to have to do in office, and they really have no way of accurately judging that leader's qualifications for making policy decisions, beyond, checking out where they stand on things that are important to you and getting a sense of, do you think they're intelligent enough? Although, as we've seen, being unintelligent now seems to be a recommendation for some part of the electorate. But I think that ultimately people are voting for the character, not so much for the policies. And so they have to like you, and they have to trust you.
And how do you judge?
And I think Meg Whitman did a number of things that made her just come across as kind of hard-edged and sort of unappealing, even to people who otherwise might have voted for her.
And how do you judge character on somebody who refuses to answer questions, who might literally run away from a journalist trying to ask a real question? I'm not talking, I hate the term gotcha journalism. If you ask somebody, wait a minute, you did this, X, Y, and Z, and it's serious, and it may affect a person's character. One of the things you'd like to see in a candidate is for them to stand on their own 2 feet and say, yeah, I screwed up. Yeah. I'll give you a good example. When they asked Barack Obama about, did he smoke marijuana? And he said, yes. Did you inhale? He said, that was the point.
Yes, exactly. Those moments... And that's interesting because, a consultant might say, oh, my God, what did he just say? But what he just did was establish a real connection as a human being.
And we never heard another peep out of it.
Sure. Or George Bush saying proudly that he was a C student at Harvard, which would otherwise be a liability. But, he made it seem kind of appealing, and he appealed to all the C students out there. It's exactly right. People want to get a sense that they're voting for a human being who they can trust. This is an important decision. And ultimately what people want in an elected official is they want somebody who they feel is strong enough to be a leader and somebody they can trust to do good things for them. So a lot of this comes down to what people in politics call optics. And running away from reporters is bad optics. And, spending $160 million on all these TV commercials but not really taking the trouble to connect with voters is bad optics. And of course, the notorious incident with her housekeeper is terrible optics. The primary, when she and Poizner tried to outdo each other beating up on immigrants, is horrendous optics, not just for Latinos and other immigrants, but for any Californian with a heart, basically.
Well, the sense of fairness and
Sure.
reasonable sort of approach to 21st century, not 19th century politics.
Yeah.
I mean, that's sorry, the 1950s are calling. They want their political wedge issues back.
Yeah. And this whole idea of the 1950s that Republicans seem to want to go back to is based on a fantasy anyway.